Okay, hey everyone. This is Jason Fitzgerald from Strength Running, and I'm thrilled today to be joined with Doug Hay, a good friend of mine and an incredible ultra runner and trail runner. And we are going to discuss trail running today. So, Doug, thanks so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are going to talk about trail running today because it's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I started trail running much more frequently back in high school, and I almost immediately recognized all the benefits of trail running, both physically and mentally. And I think if more runners did more of their mileage on trails, I think we'd all be better off from a wide variety of perspectives. So I want to encourage all of my strength running readers to do some more trail running. And I thought you would be the perfect guest because you almost exclusively run on trails. Is that right?
That is right. But I will say, like you said, I think a lot of people have this idea that if you're a trail runner, you're either just a trail runner, or if you're a road runner, you're just a road runner. But the benefits for both groups, there's benefits to training on the road, of course, and building up speed and leg turnover. And then there are tons of benefits for road runners for running on the trails. And you can actually become a better road runner by spending time on the trails. But yeah, I do almost all my running on trails these days, especially now that I've moved down to Asheville, North Carolina, and I just have mountains and trails all over the place. So I get to run free through the woods on a daily basis, which is a lot of fun.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I think you brought up a really good point that you don't necessarily have to be either 100% trail runner or 100% road runner. Both have their place and both can be used strategically in your training depending
Absolutely.
upon what you're preparing for. And I think the other important thing to note too is you don't have to run the types of trails that I think most runners think of
Hmm.
when we talk about trail running. You don't have to be on technical single track out in the mountains at 14,000 feet elevation or something crazy like that. I consider trail running to be any surface that's not the road or the sidewalk. So if you're in Central Park in New York City and you're running on a dirt path in Central Park, that's a form of trail running. And
Sure.
I think, where I am in Denver, there's a lot of parks in the city that have crushed gravel paths that are really great because they're, it's off the road, you're off, from the pounding on the cement and the concrete. So they offer a lot of benefits there, but most people don't really think of that as trail running. But I do think that, as long as you're off the road, you're doing a type of trail running.
You're exactly right. And both of us used to live in the Washington D.C. area, and that's actually where I got into trail running for the first time. I had been running road marathons for a few years and was burnt out. I was fighting a bunch of injuries, and an old roommate suggested that I check out some of the trails in Rock Creek Park, which is a big park that runs through the city. And they're not, mountain trails. They're not super technical or rugged. Most of them are pretty smooth horse trails. They're wide and smooth, and you can move pretty quickly on them. And that's really where I got into trail running because I was seeing the benefits of running on the dirt and on the uneven surface, both for injury prevention and for my mental wellness, and then that was translating into me running faster during half marathons and marathons on the road. And then I got addicted and eventually started doing ultra marathons and really switching almost all my training to trails. But it started out on these smooth, wide paths that most people have in their public town or state parks.
Yeah, and we've gone on a couple trail runs together in Rock Creek Park,
Hmm.
and what I love about that park is that it does offer so many different types of trail running.
Right. Yeah.
You can get on some much more technical, narrow trails
Hmm.
that are right above the little creek there,
Yeah.
or you can be on those very wide trails that aren't very hilly at all, those horse trails,
Yeah. Exactly.
and that's great. But you mentioned talking about kind of the mental aspects of trail running and how that makes it almost more enjoyable. Like, do you think that being on the trails, whether that's in the woods somewhere or even in a city park, do you think that somehow makes running a little bit easier from a mental perspective?
Absolutely. For me and for so many of the readers of Rock Creek Runner, I hear all the time that road running will just it'll burn you out, especially if you live in a city or a crowded place. Running crowded sidewalks and having to stop at crosswalks regularly can be really tough on you mentally. It breaks up your run. It's you're fighting against all these issues like people and crowds and that kind of thing, cars. And so moving to the trail where you aren't dealing with people, you have birds chirping, the only noise is really your foot hitting the leaves up underneath you. It's really an opportunity to take a deep breath and enjoy the run, kind of get mentally into the run more instead of having to fight all these obstacles that come with crowded roads. So for me, it's a definite, it allows me to really enjoy myself, and it's an opportunity to escape and get into my head and think things through and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we shouldn't overlook. And I know that, it's kind of crazy when you hear us talk about, oh, it's really nice to hear the birds chirping, or I just love hearing the water flowing in the river.
Right.
But, these things are really important. And when I first started trail running, I actually found that, if I had an hour run on the schedule that our coach told us to go run for an hour in high school, if we got into the woods and just did some trail running, and it didn't matter if we were, deep in some crazy woods or if it was simply, a very small trail area, the time went by a lot faster. Mm-hmm. And for those runners who struggle with getting bored on their run or simply, they just get frustrated and they want to be done sooner, trail running offers such a great escape, like you said, from normal road running. You don't have to deal with traffic or cars beeping their horns and all that stuff that is, frankly, a little stressful. You don't have to deal with any of that.
I like to think of trail running as play in a lot of ways. And of course, it can be very serious and you can do some really tough workouts on the trail. But most of the time when I'm running, you're kind of hopping over logs and rocks or, dealing with creek crossings and that kind of thing. And it's playful. It's fun. It takes you back to this primitive, childlike play that you don't normally experience on a day-to-day basis, and certainly not when you're running through crowded sidewalks. So for me, it's just kind of this opportunity to have fun and let loose and enjoy the run a lot more than I would by pounding the pavement.
Right. And I think there's a huge parallel with just the benefits of being in nature. My wife is, I'm the running geek in the family. My wife is the education geek. Mm-hmm. And, she's always telling me how important it is for little kids just to be outside, to be playing outdoors. And, maybe for our generation and people a little older than us, we grew up with our parents kind of like throwing us outside and be like, yeah, come back for dinner. But other than that, we want you outside for the whole day. Right. And I think as we get older and, we have jobs and responsibilities and all these things, we spend less and less time outside. And I think if we can spend that precious time that we do have running in a more natural environment, the benefits are lower stress. The benefits are significant. And I think we shouldn't overlook that.
Sure. That reminds me of an article I read in the Washington Post a while back, where in Japan apparently they're doing this new program for inner city residents, where they're busing them out to national parks and nature walks and things. So they're not doing big exercises, but they're just taking them out to the woods so that they can breathe in the fresh air and walk through the dirt and everything. And it's significantly reducing the stress levels of these people who are participating in the program. And I think they call it like nature bathing or something like that, which obviously has nothing to do with running, but that experience of being out in the woods and in nature can be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when was the last time you spent an hour or two out in the woods or even on the trails? If you were running or not running and you came back stressed or you had a bad day after being outside,
Absolutely.
Like it never happens, right?
Right.
So you were talking about some of the things that you encounter on the trails, fallen logs and rocks and roots and some of the natural obstacles that you encounter. And I want to talk about how some people might be intimidated by running trails. Do you think that some of the obstacles are what intimidates people, or are there other things that you've found that most people struggle with when they want to get started with trail running?
Sure, absolutely. I think that in the fear of running trails and the fear of the unknown is a big thing that keeps people from trying it, even if it's just a local town park that has some trails, because it's different. You do have to change a little bit about how you run, and you are certainly going to encounter more obstacles like stream crossings and rocks and roots and down branches. The I guess the issue is that, or the what you need to do is understand that most of the time that's not a big deal at all. Most of the time, like you said, you're not going to be at 14,000 feet scrambling over rocks where with a cliff on the side. You might have to jump over a rock or work your way over a log, but that's just part of the fun. That's part of the experience, and for me, that's part of the thrill. I think people assume that trail running is a lot more dangerous, that they'll run into wildlife, or they're much more likely to fall and injure themselves or get lost. That's a big one that people fear is getting lost. But as long as you take precautions ahead of time, like letting somebody know where you're going, studying a map, making sure that you know where you're going, and running with a partner is another just a great way to kind of ease those concerns and have someone there if you did happen to fall who would be there with you. But falling is kind of one of those things that it is going to happen probably for people when they're just starting out, because you do have to worry about things you don't worry about on the road. I know I fell quite a few times at the very beginning, but just like riding a bike or just like flying a kite, the more you do it, the better you get. And now I hardly ever stumble. I hardly ever fall. And that's just because I'm a lot better of a trail runner than I used to be. So if it's something that you're interested in doing, if it's something you want to add into your training, don't let that hold you back. Just get out there, try it a few times, get more comfortable on the trail, and you're really a lot less likely to get injured than you think you would be.
Yeah, just try it, I think, is
Yeah,
the ultimate lesson here. Because if your first time on the trails is not on a very technical trail, I don't think you really have to worry about
sure.
falling. Just like, I mean, you have to worry about falling even when you're not trail running,
Yeah,
with potholes and curbs and all the other kind of city obstacles that you'll experience when you're running out on the sidewalk or on the road. Not to mention other pedestrians and traffic with cars that I think is a lot more dangerous. I've personally almost been hit by a car or a bike or other people so many more times than I've almost gotten hurt on the trails.
right.
Even though, look, people should not be afraid of falling. I fell twice on my long run out on the trails just 3 days ago.
Oh yeah,
And my knee got a little scraped up, but the thing that hurts the most was my ego
sure.
afterward. And that's usually the case. The kind of injuries that you sustain from falling are usually not that bad.
Yeah.
The other day, I don't know if, oh, it's actually all healed, but I ran into a tree. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but these things happen, and they're not the things that you should really be scared of when you go trail running. I think probably the most intimidating thing about trail running is probably getting lost, especially if you're in a very complex trail network, or if you are doing some more technical trail running that is in a very large national park.
Mm-hmm.
But studying a map, like you mentioned, is really helpful, or just telling people where you're going. One of the other really helpful strategies that I found is simply doing an out and back run.
Right.
So you don't take any side trails, don't get off the main trail, just run out for half the time that you want to be running, and then just turn around and come back. And that's a really helpful way to not get lost. But I think the other intimidating things about trail running, including wildlife and things like that, those are things that you really shouldn't worry about. Just like you shouldn't worry about, a building falling on you if you're running in the city. Like, it's probably not going to happen.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure you're much more likely to get hit by a car than you are to encounter a bear that's going to attack you or something like that on the trails.
Right.
But
It's like people who are afraid of flying in an airplane,
right.
but they're in a car 3 times a day, when statistically, driving a car is probably one of the most dangerous things that you can do.
Sure, absolutely. And just going back to the getting lost, I think you're right. That probably is what scares people the most. But there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of by pulling out a map. Carrying a map with you in a pocket or a pack or something like that, and pulling it out and examining it if you come to an intersection that you don't know exactly which way to go. The Outback is a fantastic one. Running with somebody who's more familiar with the trails, who's already done that route, is clutch. And then, I've been known to leave myself little arrows and with sticks on the trail, if I'm coming back, if I know I'm coming back a certain way, just so that I can see those arrows on the trail. But, like you said, there are so many reasons to feel intimidated by trail running, but most of them are not things that are actually going to happen to you, or issues that you should really be concerned with.
All right. So, okay, let's transition to talking about some more technical aspects of trail running. And you had mentioned before that when you first got started with trail running, you started seeing the benefits of running more of your mileage on trails, and that was your gateway drug to becoming an ultra runner and almost exclusively running on trails.
Right.
So, what do we have to keep in mind when we start running on trails? Does the type of running that we do on trails, does it require a change to our running form? And let's start with that.
Sure. It does. You're not going to be able to open up your stride as much on a trail as you are on the road. I think that it definitely depends on the type of trail that you're running. If you're running a smooth, light gravel path that, like a Rails to Trails or something that follows, we had a great one that followed the canal around DC, then you're pretty much running on a perfectly flat and smooth surface. But that is still considered a trail. So if you're on something like that, then your form's not going to adjust so much. When you're running on something more technical and more hilly, then you are going to have to shorten your stride a little bit, lift your feet a little bit, and I like to call it more of a shuffle than a full stride, where you're being very light on your feet because you're having to bounce around a little more. You're having to jump over or can be concerned about roots and rocks a lot more. The lighter you can be on your feet, the better the more likely you are to not trip and tumble. So that's probably a big one. The other thing is you really need to slow down, especially if you're just starting out. If you run an 8-minute pace per mile on the road, chances are, unless it's a perfectly smooth flat trail, you're not going to be able to come anywhere close to that with the same level of effort. So slowing down on the trail, being much more concerned about the distance rather than the time for your first several trail runs, will allow you to run at the speed that you need to safely be on the trail. And so those are kind of the two big things that I suggest to brand new trail runners: is lift your feet, take shorter strides. If you're, instead of extending your stride to get over a root or a rock, take 2 steps instead of one, and then to, of course, slow down and run for time and total time instead of distance.
That's great advice. I've noticed that firsthand with my running, and I know that particularly the shorter, quicker steps can be very helpful because you're navigating a lot more obstacles on the path. Because the surface is a lot more uneven, you'll be required just to take shorter steps in order to get around those obstacles safely. If you're taking much longer or more bounding strides, you're going to be a lot less stable on your feet, and you're going to be more likely to fall.
Yeah.
And that was when I took a little tumble this past weekend. I was going downhill, and I wasn't taking my own advice. I was opening up my stride. I was trying to make up some time on this good downhill, but because there was a little bit of mud, I went straight down, and it wasn't pretty. But I can definitely speak to that. And when you were talking about taking shorter steps and taking 2 steps when you may only take 1, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Born to Run. And I know we've talked about this in the past, where I think the quote is, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but if you're thinking about taking 1 or 2 steps between rocks, take 3.
Yeah.
And the lesson there is just so great because the shorter, quicker steps that you are going to take on the trails, you're going to be more stable on your feet. You're going to fall less often, and you're just going to be more confident on the trails. And I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said on the downhill, it's even that much more important because your footwork is just crucial to staying upright and being able to stay in control on the downhill. If you just open up and you're just flying down, these big long strides, it's hard to be stable, and it's hard to stay in control. So with these shorter strides, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go slower. You're just turning your feet over a lot more frequently. Will keep you more stable on the downhill, especially. And the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of trails have a lot of significant and quick changes in elevation. So you might be going downhill 1 second, flat, for a short period, and then uphill. It will change more dramatically than it is going to change on a road for the most part. And so learning how to adapt your stride a little bit for that too, to be able to quickly transition from the downhill to the flat to the uphill back to the downhill, is something that takes a little bit of practice, and you'll get more comfortable with it over time. But you have to, I guess, prepare for yourself mentally for those adjustments in your stride from the different elevation.
And all those adjustments too make a big impact on your pace. I mean, you mentioned the importance of slowing down. It's such a significant change to people who are used to running on the road and getting into like a really solid rhythm. Because one thing that you don't usually get on trails, especially the more technical trails, the ones that have more hills or terrain variations, is that you don't really get into a rhythm because you're constantly turning or going uphill or downhill or navigating around some obstacles. So your pace might be significantly slower on a trail than being on a road. I know for me, I mean, I ran my long run at over a 9 minute pace this past weekend, and normally I'm 2 minutes faster
Right.
per mile. And it can be very humbling for people who are used to a certain speed on the roads, but just have to keep in mind that it's a whole different animal. It's almost like a different sport. The demands are much different, and you just have to let go of some of those pace expectations and instead rely much more on running by feel and running by effort.
Yeah. Just last week, my brother-in-law was visiting, and he's an accomplished road marathoner. Has lots of experience on the road. And we went out for a trail run, and he was really struggling in some ways. In other ways, he was doing very well. But making the transition from the different elevation changes and the more technical trail to the less technical trail, and we were talking about that. We were talking about how he doesn't feel like he can get into a rhythm on the trail, particularly on this trail, as much as he could on the road. And I think for me, over time, I've come to realize that it's a different type of rhythm. It's certainly not where you're just locking in your stride and locking in a pace, but you're more locking in an effort. And
Yes.
and you might be going a lot faster on the downhill or on the flats than you are on the uphill. And lots of times I'll even hike the steep uphill. And us ultra runners, we still consider that running. I know that a lot of shorter speedsters don't consider that running, but of course, if you have to hike to maintain an effort level, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And so you're locking in, instead of a consistent pace or stride, you're locking into this consistent effort, and you're having to adjust your pace accordingly.
Yeah, that's a really great point. All right, let's move and talk about the injury prevention benefits of trail running. And this is like everyone knows who's probably watching this that injury prevention is like my favorite topic of all time because it allows you to be more consistent. And I like to say that consistency is the secret sauce to successful running. And I've written on your website, rockcreekrunner.com, about the injury prevention benefits of trail running. But in your experience, are there significant prevention benefits to running trails? Because I know a lot of people think that they're more likely to get hurt on trails, but you and I think differently.
Yeah, that's right. And we've discussed this a lot, and I love discussing it because I think you're right. People assume that trail running means more injury, and of course there are the opportunities to fall or to twist your ankle a little bit, but like I said before, you're much less likely to have that happen over time, and as you get more comfortable in the trails. But as far as running injury prevention goes, the trails are a wonderful place for that for a few different reasons. The obvious one is the softer surface. You're not having as much impact on your joints as you would on a harder surface like a road. But the other one that people don't necessarily think about is how the change in the terrain, so how the inconsistencies in the terrain are actually benefiting you. Most running injuries are caused by repetitive strain injury. So taking the exact same motion over and over and straining your body and your muscles in the exact same way after every stride. When you're on the trails, you're having to adjust your stride constantly. You're having to mix your stride up, and that is working different muscles. It's working your ankles and your knees and your core and your hips in different ways than the road is. And by building up those surrounding muscles and mixing up your stride, you're actually significantly reducing the risk of a repetitive strain injury. So in that sense, I think trail running is a great tool for injury prevention for road runners and for trail runners. So when you get back on the road, you've built up all this strength around the muscles that you're using over and over again on the consistent surface, and you're much less likely to get injured because of it.
Yeah, the strength that you develop in the smaller stabilizing muscles and all of the ancillary muscles that kind of support all of the bigger muscles that you mentioned. Everyone knows the quads, the hamstrings, the calves, but there's a lot of smaller stabilizing muscles that don't get worked as much on the roads that get a hell of a workout on the trails.
Yeah.
And a lot of trail runners, a lot of people who start trail running will notice that after their first big trail run, their body is sore in all these ways that is totally different from road running. And, that just goes to show that trail running, I think, is a much more whole body type of workout.
Yeah.
You'll even experience maybe some upper body soreness just because you're, the way that you're climbing hills and descending hills and turning is definitely stressful in many different ways than road running is. But of course, it's stressful in a good way. This is an example of a good type of stress, and it's going to make you a stronger runner. I think it's going to make you a less injury-prone runner, especially if a runner is injury-prone. One of the best things that they can do is run more trails. I'm a huge believer in the irregular surfaces and that variety. Anyone who's read my stuff for a while or gone through injury prevention for runners knows that variety is such a critical component to my injury prevention philosophy because, let's face it, running is one of the most repetitive things that you can do. And that's why the overuse injury rate is so high, is because not only are we really good at pushing ourselves when we shouldn't be, but our sport is just incredibly repetitive. So, the name of the game then is, okay, how do we reduce that repetition? The best way to do it is to stop running, but who the hell wants to do that, right? So what we do is we get on the trails. More turns, more uphills, downhills, more variety and variation in the terrain, fewer injuries. It's pretty straightforward. And if you understand repetitive strain or repetitive stress injuries, that's one of the best ways to stay healthy in the long term.
Absolutely. And like you said, if you don't believe that, then go out for a 5-mile trail run and see how your body feels afterwards, and then you'll know for sure that it is working different muscles than what you're used to.
There's our challenge. There's our challenge to everyone who's watching this right now. If you are not a trail runner, your homework sometime in the next 1 to 2 weeks is to go and do a 5-mile trail run on let's do a more technical trail.
Yep.
And see how you feel afterward. Our bet is that you'll feel it in a lot of different ways than you would 5 miles on the road.
All right, sounds great. I love it.
All right, Doug. One more question before we talk more specifically about the trail runner system, which I'm really excited about. If someone were to get started with trail running tomorrow,
Sure.
Zero experience, never has run off-road, what are a couple pieces of advice that you would give them besides what we've already talked about?
Yeah, I would certainly say, like what we've already said, slow down. Make sure that you're running for time and not distance or pace. So if you would typically run 5 miles in an hour, than run for an hour and not worry about how far you actually get. So slow down, lift your feet, and take smaller steps. We already mentioned that one as well. And then the next thing I would say is that don't worry about it. Just go out there and do it. You don't need new shoes. You don't need new gear. If you get into it really seriously, then you're going to want to invest in a pair of trail shoes and maybe some handheld bottle if you're going out for the longer runs and that sort of thing. So you might need new gear over time, but if you're just going out for a few miles on the trails, if you're going out to a local park and doing a 5-mile trail run, you don't need all this stuff. And I think people assume that they all of a sudden need to invest in all this new gear because they're going on the trail. So just don't let those sort of obstacles hold you back, because if you right now you could run 2 miles on the road, hop on the trail for a mile, and then then you're done, and all of a sudden you've gotten a little time on the trail, and you've gotten some of the benefits that we've talked about already. So those are the big things I would talk about. And then of course the safety, make sure you tell somebody where you're going, make sure you're familiar with the trails a little bit, and carry your phone if you can. But the big thing is just go out and do it, because there's absolutely no reason, no good reason not to hop on a local trail and at least give it a try.
I think one of the things that stops many people from trail running in the first place is that they think they need a whole new wardrobe and all this new trail gear that's specific to trail running. And it's simply not the case. I mean, you've already talked about this at length, but I'll just say from my own personal experience, I have done a lot of trail running in my day, and it's only in the last couple months that I have gotten a pair of trail running shoes. Most trail running shoes I don't really like. They tend to be a little bit more bulky. They have some, the sole of the shoe offers more traction, and typically I don't really prefer that. And so I've done a lot of technical trail running with road running shoes, and for the most part, they work really well. You don't need extra stuff to become a trail runner or just to do a little bit of trail running throughout the week. So I want to encourage everyone not to let that stand in your way. That's not a good reason to do a little bit of trail running.
Yeah, absolutely. And start small. If you are able to just incorporate a mile or 2 miles into a longer run, a mile or 2 mile trails into a longer run is a great way to start, or start with a 3-mile loop that is in a local park that you can just run a few times, or stop after one if that's all you want. Start small. You don't have to go on these epic 20-mile mountain runs. You can just start by incorporating it slowly, building up over time, and you'll really see the benefits there.
Yeah. All right. We've gone over a lot of different material here to help people get started with trail running and help make trail running an easier thing to get started with. But we've really only scratched the surface. And Doug, you've recently put together probably the best trail running program I've ever seen. Very video-based, which I love. I think that's really great for the learning process. But tell us more about the Trail Runner system and what kind of program it really is.
Sure. It's something I'm super excited about, and we just released it a couple weeks ago. It's a system that is designed to help people transition from the roads, runners of all abilities, to transition from the roads to the trails, and then, if they want to, from shorter distance trail running to endurance trail running, a trail marathon, or a 50K or 50-mile ultra marathon. So it is a series of videos and audio interviews with about 11 or 12 different experts. So you're actually one of the injury prevention experts, but we have elite endurance or elite ultra runners like Stephanie Howe, who's won Western States, and a whole number of other elite ultra runners, and then some mid-packers who have tons of experience but know what it's like to be training with a full-time job and a family and dealing with all of those types of things that are required or that most mid-packers are actually experiencing. And it's audio and video covering everything from nutrition for runners to injury prevention, a library of training plans. We have 10 different training plans, from base building and half marathon to marathon and 50K, 50-mile ultra marathons. And on top of that, there's this community side of it. There's a private community where runners really of all levels. We have someone who's 75 years old and just ran his first trail 10K a couple weeks ago,
That's awesome.
to someone who's training for a 100 miler. And it's neat. Everyone is coming together and supporting each other and sharing their secrets and sharing tips about gear. And it's this really neat online system where you log in and you work your way through the different lessons, the different units. And I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited for runners to be able to have this information as they transition from the roads, to eliminate those fears and really be able to smartly transition from the roads to the trails and incorporate that into their training. So they don't have to be going after a big trail marathon or ultra marathon. It might just be that you want to incorporate a little bit more trail into your road training. But now you have the tools and you have the knowledge to do it properly and to do it efficiently.
Yeah, and what I really like about it is that it's incredibly immersive. So it's not just like an ebook that you get.
Right.
It's a complete website that you log into, and then once you're logged into the Trail Runner system, the types of kind of formats of content that you get are very comprehensive. So there's audio, video, there's text, there's training plans, and the other thing that I really like is that you've brought in so many other different people to learn from.
Right.
And one of the things that I try to do frequently at strength running that I think you've done exceptionally well in the Trail Runner system is that let's take the principles or the systems that elites use or professionals or even like sub-elite runners, and let's scale them down to the recreational runner. So, there's so much that we can learn from elite runners. And of course, we're not saying you have to run 140 miles a week in the mountains to be a trail runner. Of course not. But there are still lessons that we can learn from people who are performing at the top of their sport. And so you've brought in a lot of experts in that regard. You've brought in some registered dietitians and some other people who are really great at providing their expertise. And it's all centered on trail running. So it's very, very specific and very immersive, which I really love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really proud of how it came together and excited for the runners that are already using it. And I know that they're benefiting greatly. And it was neat to have you as part of the system and just so many other experts. Like you said, I take their interviews and break them down for you and help you understand how you can actually incorporate that information into your training and make it useful for you, not just because they're elites and they say you should do this, but what elements of that you can use and incorporate into your training.
I love it. And then, of course, there's the community aspect of it. And we all know that there's power in numbers. I just wrote about my lone wolf theory, where I encourage people to get outside help if they need it. Surround yourself with people who have similar goals. And I can't think of a better way to do it if you want to get started with trail running and be serious about it than getting the Trail Runner system. So I'm going to include some more information underneath the interview here on strength running. But Doug, thanks so much for sharing your expertise here and answering all these questions. I know that we only scratched the surface here, but it was still a lot of fun to chat.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure, and I absolutely love talking about trail running and how it's changed my life and how it's changed so many other readers and people who are joining the Trail Runner system now. So thanks for letting me come on and talk about it, and I hope to see some new people in there.
Yeah, definitely. And I would be remiss not to actually show my shirt here. I'm wearing a shirt that says, "This is my gym." And of course, there's pictures of runners on the trails there.
Yeah, you posted that a shot of you in that shirt on Instagram one time, and I was like, wow, I love that shirt. Where did you get that, son? That's neat.
I know. I'll try to include a link to the shirt. I forget exactly where I got it, but I'll look for it.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jason. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. Thanks, Doug. Take care.